Austin Cindric receives a massive points penalty and fine after right rear hooking Ty Dillon at Circuit of the Americas on Sunday, while in the meantime, Chase Briscoe receives all his points back and does not have to pay that fine anymore after winning his appeals process. Let's break down this week's NASCAR penalty report. Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and let's break down some NASCAR points penalties that came out today. Austin Cindric hit with a massive fine and points penalty following the Sunday's race to Circuit of the Americas. A couple of crew members suspended off of Kyle Larson's team for that tire rolling off at the closer to the end of that race on Sunday. And then of course we'll talk about Chase Briscoe winning his appeal for a modified part. Only a few of those that we've seen actually get appealed. He receives all those 100 points back, and he will receive the 10 playoff points back, and the fine no longer has to be paid. A massive win today for the 19 team at Joe Gibbs Racing. Let's break it all down. A lot to get into on this Wednesday afternoon. Let's start out with the Austin Cindric penalty. So we can go back to Sunday at Circuit of the Americas. I believe this is really early in the race. This is lap 4 of the 95 scheduled laps. Austin Cindric gets into it with Ty Dillon coming out of turn 20, coming to the start-finish line. On that front straightaway in front of the main grandstands, Austin Cindric does turn left, right rear hooks Ty Dillon. That obviously spins Ty Dillon around in front of the 38 car. Just a big mess there. Retaliation move, an obvious retaliation move for the driver, number 2, Austin Cindric, but he's going to have to pay for it heavily. 50-point penalty, regular season point penalty. That's going to drop him from 11th in the standings to 34th in the standings, putting him out of the NASCAR playoffs as it stands right now. That's a massive points deficit. I think we saw that in Austin Cindric's 118 starts, he's never received more than 50 points in a race. You know, the max you can get is 60. He's never received more than 50 except one time, and I believe that was maybe at Atlanta, I believe. So only one time has he received more than 50 points in a single race weekend. So certainly that's a huge deficit for the 2-car of Austin Cindric. Very upsetting for that team. They will not appeal from everything that I've seen so far. So they're going to take that 50 points and try to go with it. It would be very difficult to appeal something like that, understandably. NASCAR did say they considered the one race suspension for Cindric, but here's a tweet from Bob Pockris. He says NASCAR gave him the reason that drivers were traveling at a slower pace on this road course, versus obviously a Daytona, Talladega, or an intermediate racetrack, a mile and a half, typical mile and a half. Also said that Dillon had no significant impact or damage, was able to continue racing in the race, and then there wasn't even a caution for this incident. So NASCAR felt that a one-race suspension was not appropriate. Remember, if you do give the one-race suspension out now, that means more than ever, because you would possibly receive a waiver, but if you did make the playoffs with that waiver, you'd be the last seed guaranteed for the rest of the year. There'd be nothing to race for except making it in. As far as gaining an advantage, you wouldn't be able to do so going into the playoffs. So certainly the one-race suspension was not given to Austin Cindric by NASCAR, but still, I don't think what he did was too egregious. You talk about some frustrating situations on the racetrack. I think it was a frustrating situation. They were coming off of a really tight corner. They were going very slow considering, other NASCAR racing facilities where we have had penalties for similar instances. I don't know if this should have been a penalty from NASCAR. Maybe a warning would have been warranted, but the right rear hook on a front straightaway at a road course, slow racetrack, doesn't bring out a caution. Ty Dillon basically just spins out, keeps going. I don't know if this warranted a 50-point penalty. That's a massive amount of points. The $50,000 penalty, I think I can get behind, but the 50 points, that's just massive for that team, and that's going to put them in a big deficit. That could cost them a lot in this 2025 NASCAR season. We could be going back to that and pointing at how that has really hurt Austin Cindric later in the season. We'll talk about it. Kyle Larson also received a penalty late in the race. You see a rear tire, or actually the front tire, I believe that's the right front tire, that fell off the race car at Circuit of the Americas, started rolling around the racetrack closer to the end of stage 2. This didn't require a caution because, it kind of rolled off the racetrack. There were only 2 laps left till the stage end. You could go out there and just grab it with no big issues, so that did not warrant a caution, but that is a penalty. This is a set penalty that NASCAR set a couple of years ago. Once again, you would be held for 2 laps on the racetrack. They did that. Obviously ruins Kyle Larson's chances of coming back, but also that 2 crew members would be suspended. It used to be the crew chief suspended for 2 weeks, but they did not suspend the crew chief this time. Now, they can suspend the crew chief, but they did not decide to do that this time. NASCAR suspended the jack man, and they also suspended the front tire changer, which seems pretty appropriate, right? Obviously that encourages them to not have these mistakes again moving forward. A big issue there. Tires falling off race cars on a racetrack is a big issue. This time it was at a road course. It kind of went in an area where no car should ever be So certainly that's a better situation, but still a massive penalty for those drivers in that team. The last thing to talk about today, and it's a big one, Chase Briscoe wins his appeals. The penalty is completely overturned. He received a 100-point regular season points penalty. He received 10 playoff point penalty. He would start negative if he made the playoffs. It'd be difficult to make it with the 100-point deficit. Obviously, the $100,000 fine, all that has been reversed. Chase Briscoe completely wins his penalty appeal. No issues at all. It's going to put him from last for sure, 40th, negative points to in the playoffs, 14 in the point standings in the NASCAR playoffs. Certainly a massive difference with Chase Briscoe winning this appeals. This puts him right back in. I thought this was a huge issue for Chase Briscoe going into this season. I think this was a massive disaster following the Daytona 500. It was going to cost him a lot. Fortunately for him, they did win the appeals panel. A bit surprised that they won this. We go back to many prior instances where there's been, modification of parts, and we've seen massive penalties, and those penalties were not appealed. They did not win the appeals process. In fact, Colleague Racing did not win their appeals process, but was able to get it back because it was a similar instance to Hendrick Motorsports. NASCAR gave it to them. But other than that, just a very strange situation. Did not expect NASCAR or the appeals panel to appeal this penalty. It was three people in the process that Joe Gibbs Racing, Chase Briscoe, that team was presenting to. Here's a tweet from Jeff Gluck. The appeals believes that on the race car there, so I guess there were holes in that rear spoiler at Daytona. Obviously, that could potentially be a massive aerodynamic advantage. Daytona is a very aerodynamic racetrack. But apparently they might have come from when you were putting that rear spoiler on the deck of the race car, and then that's what caused those holes to form. So it wasn't even like, the louvers a few years ago where they modified them so they would fit. This was more of a, they didn't even modify it at all themselves. This just happened to occur when it was being put in place, accidentally or something potentially breaking. That's certainly a bit frustrating. I think this is an issue that maybe we could fix moving forward. It's frustrating that during the race week on a Wednesday, the points are changing. And that's happened now 2 of the 3 weeks this season. That's a bit frustrating. I hope this issue doesn't continue moving forward. Maybe we could do some things to try to prevent this. I would like to see what's going on with these vendors. Are there issues with the vendors? And why are these parts changing and teams are getting penalties? If it's because of how the vendors are doing things, maybe that needs to be checked in. A lot of these companies have vendors. I'm just talking about outside of sports even. A lot of companies have vendors that can get things within a thousandth of an inch, and they never have issues with this. Is this an issue that we are having with NASCAR? I don't know. That probably needs to be looked into. And if NASCAR is going to issue these penalties for this, maybe they should have took a little bit deeper dive into why there was an issue so we didn't have to even deal with this, right? This is a big deal. Teams have to, put money into putting together some sort of argument to go to present to appeals panel. NASCAR has to deal with the appeals. It kind of makes NASCAR look bad when they hand out a massive penalty and then that completely gets appealed by their own appeals process. Certainly not a good look, but that's really the thick of it. I think we could find ways to try to better implement this. Points changing in the middle of the week constantly, it seems like, is a bit frustrating for fans. It's hard to follow, and it's probably very frustrating for teams, drivers, and NASCAR as well. So hopefully this doesn't continue moving forward throughout the 2025 season. That's it. Really all there is to dissect following the penalty report today. Once again, a lot came out today. Points are continuing to change. But that's it. Really all there is to talk about. We do head to Phoenix, new tire compound this week in Phoenix. One of the softer tires. I believe there'll be an option tire as well, so that'll be interesting to watch at 2 o'clock on Saturday. They'll do practice qualifying. Might do a short video on that as well. And then, of course, the race on Sunday. Hopefully it's a good one. Christopher Bell going for 2 Phoenix wins in a row and 3 NASCAR wins in a row in Phoenix. But, of course, following today's penalty report, let's get rowdy.